These used to be the ultimate dream homes. But now, many rich people are swapping those out for houses like these, higher than floods can reach, or further away from wildfire zones. Climate change is affecting where people want to live, and it's making many of us pay more for housing all over the world. So what's going on, and what can we do about it? One thing you've likely noticed if you've paid for rent or a mortgage ever is that housing costs have exploded in many parts of the world. Everyone and their mom is talking about the G word.
Gentrification.
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 People flocking to cities, more and more investment companies snapping up real estate, plus inflation and towering construction costs are fueling a global housing crisis.
It's not a uniquely rural issue or urban issue or homeowners issue or renter issue.
Sarah McTarnahan researches how climate change impacts communities.
But we're in this kind of shared experience where home prices and rents have continued to rise much quicker than income.
Housing costs are blowing up, especially in major cities. And it's happening all over the world. Half of the cities with the fastest growing rents are in the global south. And climate change is making all of this worse. In the past years, increasingly common natural disasters have wiped out tons of homes, and the fewer houses there are, the more prices go up. More than 1.2 billion people are highly vulnerable to at least one critical climate hazard. This map shows where they live, most of them in Asia, but also in the US, where roughly 1/3 of households are exposed to high risk from natural hazards. Whether it's storms in coastal communities, rain-fueled landslide and flooding, or heat-driven wildfire, much of the world is at risk.
What we're finding more and more is what we're calling sort of double and triple threats.
Howard Botts is chief scientist at CoreLogic, a company that develops climate risk models for the housing market.
And we have a large number of places that you could see a hurricane hitting, intense rainfall for flooding, and a wildfire, for instance. So, I think we're seeing multiple sorts of perils.
All of this is giving rise to a whole new phenomenon, climate gentrification. What people consider to be the ideal place to live is changing, and areas that used to be more affordable or undesirable are now in high demand and are becoming more expensive. That's exactly what's playing out in Miami.
You have high-income folks on low-lying coastal areas that are vulnerable to flooding that are now looking to higher elevation areas that are historically lower-income communities.
Zach Taylor researches the link between climate change and the housing and insurance markets.
And are shifting their investment patterns in that direction, displacing those existing low-income residents.
While plenty are still willing to shell out for beachfront properties in neighborhoods like Miami Beach, prices in inland areas like Little Haiti are rising faster than the rest of the city. Higher elevation Miami real estate is some of the fastest appreciating in the US.
I've spoken with real estate developers who have told me that yes, they do think about elevation now when they buy long-term property for development.
Climate gentrification also takes hold in the wake of disasters, as people lose their homes and entire neighborhoods and cities are rebuilt and often totally revamped. In New Orleans, housing prices jumped 33% in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. In Puerto Rico, housing costs rose 22% after Hurricane Maria hit in 2017.
We often think about success in disaster recovery is that we bring back the housing units, but there's not a lot of visibility to whether that housing unit is still affordable or still occupied by the same person.
And as if housing costs weren't already rising sharply enough, there's another often overlooked factor adding to what it costs to keep a roof over our heads: insurance. In Australia, frequently ravaged by wildfires and flooding, 15% of households spend more than 4 weeks of their annual income insuring their houses. And in Germany, where floods strike more and more often, home insurance premiums are predicted to double in the next 10 years. In the US, average homeowners insurance premiums nearly tripled between 2001 and 2021.
To make ends meet as housing costs rise, including insurance,
as part of that package. Households might decide to forego maintenance and retrofits.
Moira Burrs works on finding policy solutions for challenges around climate and inequality.
When a big disaster hits, those homes are both more susceptible to damage, but also those residents might have fewer resources to recover with.
And eye-wateringly expensive insurance isn't just a problem for homeowners.
Rates for multifamily buildings, right, so like apartment buildings and the like, are also going up. And right, we can safely assume that landlords are passing most, if not all of those costs on to tenants, which means rents are rising.
In some cases, we can be talking about many thousands of dollars extra per year. So I really see it as a working and middle class issue that is really widespread.
These unbearable costs mean that people in at-risk regions have a hard choice to make. They can either roll the dice with minimal or even no insurance, or move somewhere else. Easier said than done when housing costs are so high in the first place. And so a lot of people go for the first option, forgoing coverage just as disaster becomes more likely. This has grown what experts call the protection gap, aka the difference between insured and uninsured losses. In 2023, only 38% of the roughly $280 billion in damages caused by natural disaster were actually insured. This gap is a lot wider in the global south. In Asia, it's a whopping 85%.
It most affects the low-income rural community who depends on agriculture or small-scale livelihood.
Yao Lei researches how policy could fix this insurance gap.
For example, the coffee farmers in Indonesia, or a market vendor in Bangladesh whose income may be disrupted by floods because that flood will limit their access to the customers. Those groups are hit the hardest because they have few resources to recover from the losses.
Because Asia is vulnerable to a range of climate-related disasters, hundreds of millions of people are at risk. And this all puts the insurance industry in a bit of a pickle. Much of the planet can't afford insurance. Meanwhile, inflation and supply chain issues mean that when disaster strikes, rebuilding is getting more expensive. Falling revenues plus rising costs equals bad business. For the past 4 years, US homeowners insurers have shelled out more for claims than they've taken in. And they've responded to this challenge by jacking up prices even more, or in some cases simply leaving regions they think are too risky to turn a profit. Major providers recently left Florida and California. But there are ways of protecting ourselves better, ideally long before any disaster. Making houses climate-proof with fire-resistant roofing or sturdy sidings in hurricane and typhoon-prone regions can lower risk. This costs money, but in the long run, it's cheaper than dealing with the damages, and it saves lives. Significant state investment in infrastructure can make whole areas safer.
In the Netherlands, there's a tradition of building really strong physical infrastructure to deal with flood risk, for example. And what that means is that most people living in the low-lying parts of the Netherlands, large parts of which are below sea level, they don't have flood insurance. They don't need it. And you just don't see that kind of strategy for a variety of reasons in places like Florida.
From Thailand to Berlin, sponge city projects are swapping concrete and pavement for permeable surfaces like plants and moss to absorb water.
The more we build resistance, the less we need to rely on that safety net of insurance. So in this pillar, right, activities would include everything from deciding where it's too risky to build new housing and restricting it, helping people relocate from where it's too dangerous to stay, and carrying out community-oriented risk mitigation efforts.
Another issue is that climate change is often low priority when people are deciding where to live.
If you overlay housing starts and in migration, like where people are moving to, and climate risk in the United States, it's the opposite relationship that those of us working in climate adaptation would want to see. We see rapid growth in at-risk areas.
While at the city level, high elevation neighborhoods are starting to gentrify, on national and regional levels, wildfire and flood areas are still popular, and many can't just jump up and move across the country because of climate risk. Buyback schemes and even creative insurance policies, like slowly phasing out insurance coverage along coastlines once houses are sold, could help here too. All of this will dull the impact of disasters, but knowing just how to prepare requires accurate risk prediction. Insurance groups and more recently independent companies have developed sophisticated climate-based risk models.
I think the direction that we've been heading over the years is more granularity, taking these global climate models, which are quite large, 100 by 100 kilometers or so in size, and being able to downscale those in a highly accurate manner.
His company CoreLogic is doing just that, predicting climate risk through 2050.
Across the globe, we're going to see intensity of events, but we're also going to see much more variability, potentially colder winters, hotter summers, more intense storm events of all kinds.
In the insurance world, this means designing plans that cover all kinds of disasters and are widely available, if not mandatory, similar to how many countries approach health insurance. Places like Spain, France, and Switzerland bundle disaster coverage into common and often mandatory home insurance policies, frequently with state backing. This spreads the risk over more people, creating a bigger pot to keep costs down. Instead of leaving it all to private insurers to figure out, a comprehensive approach to risk will mean encouraging people to move out of catastrophe's way, helping them shore up their homes, and keeping prices down on their insurance. That sounds like a tall task, but it's more sustainable than leaving people to face disaster on their own. Keeping housing affordable and shielding our communities from climate disaster will mean changing how we think about risk in the first place.
Hurricanes aren't something that I individually can control, let alone that I can really do some of the more infrastructural risk reduction measures that might be needed, like sewer upgrades to reduce the risk of flooding. Fire reduction measures on that hillside is not something I can go and do on my own.
Without a collective approach, costs and the damage done by natural disasters will only keep spiraling out of control.
So, what do you think we need to do in order to keep both housing and insurance affordable in the face of climate change? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. We've got new videos for you every Friday.